Hey Picture Perfect people, it is Katie here to give you some information on where we are with, you guessed it, aeration and seeding. We've been talking about it a lot. It's still going on. We're only like a quarter of the way through technically on those services. So I wanted to give you guys an update with how hot and humid it has been and just point out a couple of things to you that you might be noticing. So a question that we've been getting more often this season because of how hot it's been for the last few weeks is, why isn't my seed doing anything? As you know, turf-type tall fescue is a cool season grass, so it does best in conditions between 60 and 75 degrees on average. Right now, even last week and even forecasted for next week, we're still getting highs that are in the 90s. And even though our lows are getting down into the 60s, that still balances out in the high 70s. So we're seeing the situation where it is still just a little bit too hot for ideal germination conditions. So unfortunately, planting fescue in summer conditions is a necessary evil because of that bell curve that affects the ideal window in which those air and soil temperatures are best suited for fescue development. What makes it even tougher is that where that bell curve really hits can vary pretty widely season to season. We know that there are certain air and soil temperatures that are ideal for fescue seed germination. We just don't know when those are going to be. Even forecasting the weather, you can only really see that 10 days out, and that can change a lot, but there's so much more time that's involved in getting that seed to grow in. As a result, if you're in the first quarter or the final quarter of that bell curve for aeration seeding, a lot of the time you can see a dormant seed period. So I want to talk to you guys about that because it may be something that you're seeing if you've already seeded in September. Typically, tall fescue is most suited for germination when the average air and soil temperatures are between 60 and 75 degrees. Now remember, that is total average temperatures. So a lot of times people will hear that and they'll say, oh my gosh, you're putting down seed when it's hitting 94 degrees outside, what are you doing? But that's because it's 64 at night. So that comes out to an average in the high 70s, which is still a little too warm, but it's not the dramatic unideal that it would be during the summer when it's only getting down into the 80s at night. With those right temperatures and with proper watering, germination most often occurs within 7, 10, 14 days of the time that that seed is put down. At that point, proper fertilization and continued watering and continued conditions all roll together to impact how quickly that seed develops into adult grass. As we've talked about before, typical temperature fluctuations in a transition zone like Virginia are less than ideal for pretty much any type of grass. You know, our winters are too long and too cold for warm season grasses like Bermuda and zoysia, but our summers are too hot for cool season grasses like bluegrass and even sometimes fescue. Fescue seems to be the greatest compromise because it's a lot easier to try to nurse it through a few months of the summer than it is to just deal with a brown dormant lawn for over half the year like you would with a warm season turf, which for some people doesn't really matter, but a lot of people in our area get upset about that. And that's why we have fescue. So with these extreme temperature fluctuations that we experience and are seeing more and more each year, from triple-digit heat waves in the summer to deep freezes in the winter, it can make it really hard to try to nail down an ideal time to apply fescue seed any given fall. So as you know, we typically aim for approximately early September to early November for that seeding. And that gives us enough opportunity to be able to service all of our clients while still hitting that bell curve. And you think about the shape of a bell curve, there's going to be the earliest section that, hey, it's not too early, but it's not that peak. And then there's going to be that late section where we're still good, it's just late. You know, it's not bad. None of those service dates in that early September to early November window are bad. They just come with their own challenges. And that's not a bad thing. We have seen across the board, no matter when in that range your seed is put down, there are still long-term gains. We see the same level of success. It just needs to be handled differently. So I want to give you guys an idea of that early side of the bell curve. So this September time frame. and why it's a more unique situation than it will be in a few weeks. So just to give you perspective, when we're looking at the late side of that bell curve, our biggest concerns are early frosts and freezes, as well as leaf season. Having a bunch of leaves piled up on that baby grass can be a big problem, and we're going to talk about that in a future video. On the flip side, with this early season seeding, the biggest issue is going to be late stage heat waves that we don't really have a way of predicting, especially if they're paired with some periods of drought. So what happens when week to week those average air and soil temperatures are above that 60 to 75 ideal range? Not much. Literally, not much happens because your fescue seed just kind of sits and it waits for that ideal moment. Now, this is where I get a lot of misconceptions because a lot of people think that if it hasn't germinated in a week or two, it must be bad seed, it must have gotten washed away somehow, it must be dead, which isn't really possible. There's no real reason to be concerned because so long as your seed is still there, it's going to come up. It's just waiting for its time to shine. Instead of seeing that germination in 7 to 14 days, if the average air temperature is still coming out in the high 70s or low 80s, it's probably just going to be another couple of weeks. That's literally all that's happening. Your seed is hunkered down, it's waiting it out, and it's expecting those cooler temperatures to be right around the corner, just like we are. This delay in germination is what we refer to as dormant seed. That's because the seed isn't dead, it's not damaged, it's not gone, it's just dormant. It's gone into hibernation because it's not the ideal conditions for it to grow in yet. And you don't want it to. I've seen situations before where we had a nice chilly little snap and all the seed came up, and then we had a freak random early fall heat wave and it fried. So you want it to do what it's naturally meant to do, which is to wait it out and wait for that time when it's going to be safe for it to germinate. Now, I will let you know the biggest way that you can exacerbate a dormant seed situation as a result of planting fescue in summer conditions is if you don't water it. That moisture level makes a huge difference in being able to get your seed germinating and doing what it needs to do quickly. If it is hot on top of being dry, that's a twofold punch to your baby grass. So it's ideal, if at all possible, to water it correctly, multiple times a day for very short intervals to keep that seed damp. Now keep in mind, you know that I'm big on pros and cons, and there are two sides to every story. So there are just as many benefits to getting your seeding done in that September window as there are the detriments. You don't have to deal with that late stage problem of an early leaf season and all of a sudden your baby grass is being covered with leaves, but it hasn't all come up, so you can't really blow and it just becomes a problem. You don't have to deal with that. You have plenty of time for your grass seed to come in. Additionally, there's no risk of frost being an issue because clearly it's way too hot. So there's a silver lining in addition to there being its own unique challenges. The heat is going to get better. What goes up must come down. We don't know when it'll come down, but it will. So please don't worry, don't freak out about it. Just keep it in mind and know that so long as your seed is still there, it's going to come up. As always, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to learn with me about the aeration seeding process. We're almost done with these videos because I've hit pretty much every topic that you could imagine, but be sure to stay tuned because next week we're going to have a video about fall fungus, specifically gray leaf spot. And because of how hot and humid it's been, this is a season where we're seeing higher rates of it, potentially threatening these newly seeded lawns. So keep in touch with me on that, comment below if you have any questions, and keep me up to date as well on what your seeding experience has been. I love hearing from you guys. Again, I hope you have a good rest of your day and keep it picture perfect. We'll talk to you later.